Sister? Max, what the hell are you doing? The words left my mouth before I even registered them. My voice, raw and jagged, tore through the thick summer air, shattering the illusion of peace in this godforsaken vacation house. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breath hitched in my throat, and for a split second, everything felt unreal. They turned toward me, eyes wide, frozen in place like two criminals caught mid-act. My sister, my own sister, wrapped in nothing but the sheet from the bed, her bare shoulders exposed, hair tousled. And Max, my Max. Or at least the Max I thought I knew. He was half-dressed, his face contorted into something that wasn't quite shame, not quite regret, more like irritation at being interrupted. The room smelled of sex and betrayal. I felt my stomach twist, a wave of nausea rising so fast I thought I might collapse. My knees buckled, my fingers dug into the wooden doorframe, desperate for something solid, something real to anchor me in this moment that felt like a nightmare. You. My voice broke, but I forced the words out. You disgusting, backstabbing pieces of... How long has this been going on? Max was the first to move, quickly grabbing for his shirt as if covering himself would somehow make this less horrific. Babe, listen, Don't you dare call me that! I hissed, taking a step forward. My entire body was shaking, a strange mix of rage and devastation coursing through my veins like fire and ice. My sister, my blood, clutched the sheet tighter around herself, her face a mask of something that looked eerily like pity, like she had the audacity to feel sorry for me. Please, just let us explain, she murmured. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Explain? Oh, I'd love to hear this one. What exactly is there to explain, Sophia? That you decided my boyfriend was yours to fuck? That the man who swore he loved me thought I was stupid enough to never find out? Max stepped toward me, hands raised like I was some wild animal that might pounce. It's not what it looks like, he started. I snapped. Are you serious? It looks like you're screwing my sister in my family's vacation house, in the bed I was supposed to be sleeping in. So please, enlighten me. What the hell does it look like to you? His jaw clenched, but he had no answer. Of course he didn't. There was no answer that would undo this, no explanation that would make this okay. Sophia had the nerve to look guilty. I never meant for this to happen. I turned on her so fast she flinched. Never meant for it to happen? My voice dripped with venom. You never meant to betray your sister? You never meant to climb into bed with the one person who was supposed to love me? Funny, because it sure as hell looks intentional from where I'm standing. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. Not in front of them. Max ran a hand through his hair, sighing like this was some kind of inconvenience to him. It just happened, okay? It wasn't planned. I recoiled as if he had struck me. Oh, so you just tripped and fell into my sister? You expect me to believe that? Silence. Then, the final blow. Sophia glanced at Max before looking back at me, something unreadable in her expression. And that was when I knew. This wasn't a one-time mistake. My breath hitched. My voice dropped to a whisper. How long? She hesitated. Sophia. My tone turned ice cold. How long? She swallowed hard, looking away, as if she couldn't even bear to see the devastation she had caused. A year. The air left my lungs. My hands went numb. The world tilted, spun, and crashed all at once. A year. A whole year. 12 months. 52 weeks of lies. I let out a shaky breath, barely able to process it. So every time I told you how much I loved him, every time I confided in you, every time I thought I had a sister who cared about me, you were sneaking behind my back with him? I'm sorry, she whispered. I laughed, the sound hollow and broken. Sorry? You're sorry? That's all you have to say? Max, always the coward, had the audacity to look at me with something resembling guilt. I didn't want to hurt you. I shook my head, disgust curling in my stomach. Oh, so screwing my sister was supposed to make me feel good? No one spoke. The weight of their betrayal hung in the air, suffocating me. I stepped back, the reality of it all crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I had loved him. I had trusted her. And now, they had both shattered me in ways I didn't even know were possible. But I wouldn't break. Not in front of them. I straightened, my chin high despite the tears threatening to spill. "You two deserve each other," I said, voice steady. "And I hope, no, I know, you'll regret this." With that, I turned on my heel and walked out. Because no matter how much it hurt, I refused to let them see me fall. I still remember the first time I saw Max. It was one of those moments that don't feel significant at the time, but in hindsight, become the turning points of your life. It was autumn, and the cafe was nearly empty. I had my usual spot by the window, a cup of coffee beside my laptop, drowning in notes and textbooks. Midterms were eating me alive, and I had been staring at the same page for what felt like hours when I first noticed him. He walked in with the kind of presence that naturally drew attention, not arrogant, but effortless. Dark hair slightly messy, that lazy confidence in his step, and a smile that hinted at some inside joke only he knew. He sat at the table next to mine, and I tried to ignore him, tried to focus on my studies. But I could feel his eyes on me, and soon enough I looked up. "Studying hard or hardly studying?" he asked, his voice smooth, teasing. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't stop the small smirk tugging at my lips. "That's the worst pickup line I've ever heard." "Not a pickup line," he shot back. "Just an observation. You've been staring at that page like it personally offended you." I sighed dramatically. It kind of did. That made him chuckle, and before I knew it, we were talking. It was easy, natural, as if we had known each other for years. By the time I gathered my things to leave, I had given him my number without even thinking twice. Our first date was something straight out of a movie. A rooftop restaurant, fairy lights strung overhead, the kind of soft jazz playing in the background that makes everything feel more intimate. I remember the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the world. We talked for hours, about our childhoods, our dreams, the things that made us who we were. He told me about growing up in a small town, about how he had always wanted more, how he worked hard to build a life for himself in the city. And he listened, really listened, when I spoke. His eyes never left mine, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that made me feel like he genuinely cared. By the time he walked me home that night, I knew. I was already falling. Loving Max was effortless. He made even the smallest moments feel special. Texts in the middle of the day just to say he was thinking of me. Little notes left in my bag with messages like, "You're the best part of my day." He remembered the tiniest details, how I liked my coffee, the way I always curled up with a book on rainy days, the fact that I couldn't fall asleep without socks on because my feet got cold too easily. And my parents loved him. My dad, always skeptical of the men I dated, took to Max instantly. They bonded over football, over classic cars, over things I never thought my father would have in common with someone I brought home. My mom, who had an uncanny ability to see through people, gave me her rare stamp of approval after only a few months. "He's a good one," she told me one evening as we washed dishes together. "I can see it in the way he looks at you." And I believed her. I believed everything. Max became a part of my life so seamlessly, it was hard to remember what things had been like before him. He was there in every corner of my world, woven into my routines and my happiest moments. We traveled together, spent late nights driving with no destination, laughed until we cried over the silliest things. I never doubted him, not once. And then there was Sophia. My little sister had always been my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone else. When she first met Max, I had been excited for them to get along. I wanted my two favorite people to like each other, and they did. I remember the first time he made her laugh so hard she had to wipe away tears. I had smiled, thinking how lucky I was that they got along so well. I remember how Sophia would tease me about him, nudging me in the ribs and whispering, "You really found a good one, huh?" How naive I had been. Back then, I didn't notice the extra seconds their glances lingered, the inside jokes that didn't include me, the way she started dressing up a little more when she knew he'd be around. Back then, I thought love was something that made you safe. I had no idea that the man who made me feel like I was living in a fairy tale was the same one who would rip me apart. No idea that the love story I thought I was living was never real at all, just a beautifully crafted lie. It started with little things. The kind of things you brush off at first because love makes you blind to the cracks forming right in front of you. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking, that I was just being paranoid. After all, Max had never given me a reason to doubt him. He loved me. He showed it in a million little ways, every single day. And Sophia? She was my sister. She would never, never betray me like that. So I ignored the feeling in my gut, the one that whispered to me when I wasn't looking for it. The first time I felt it, we were at a family barbecue. One of those easy, golden summer afternoons, filled with laughter, the scent of grilled food in the air, my dad telling the same stories he always did, and my mom shaking her head with an affectionate smile. Max fit in perfectly, as always. He was flipping burgers at the grill, joking with my dad, making my little cousins giggle with his ridiculous impressions. And Sophia? She was sitting beside me, twirling a piece of her hair around her finger, watching him with a look I couldn't quite place. It was subtle, but when he turned around to say something, the way she laughed, just a little too much, a little too easily, felt wrong. I shook it off. Maybe I was just imagining things. But then I noticed it again. The way her eyes always found him in a room. The way she leaned in when they talked, touching his arm as she laughed at his jokes. I had always thought of my sister as affectionate, but this felt different. It made my stomach twist. A few weeks later, Max and I went to the movies. It was one of our traditions. He always let me pick the movie, no matter how much he pretended to complain about my choices. But that night, something was off. He was distracted, checking his phone a little too often. At first, I thought it was work, so I let it go. But when his phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes, and he tilted the screen just enough so I wouldn't see, something in my chest tightened. I glanced at him. "Who keeps texting you?" He barely looked up. "Just a friend." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. And for the first time since we started dating, I felt a twinge of doubt. Then came the night at the bar. It was supposed to be a fun, casual night out, just the three of us, Max, Sophia, and me. We had done things like this before, and I had never thought twice about it. But this time was different. It started when we got our drinks. I had barely taken a sip when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom, and I looked away for just a second. When I glanced back up, Sophia was laughing at something Max had whispered in her ear. Her hand, delicate and casual, rested on his forearm. It was brief, a second, maybe two. But it was enough. Something inside me snapped. I forced a smile and took a slow sip of my drink. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I told myself to stay calm, to act normal. Maybe I was just being ridiculous. I decided to test it. Over the next hour, I started watching them closely. The way he looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching. The way her body always leaned just a little too close. The inside jokes that didn't include me. The moment I went to the bathroom and came back to find them speaking in hushed tones, their faces just a little too close, was the moment I knew. But I still didn't say anything. Because what would I even say? "Hey, I think my boyfriend and my sister are acting weird together?" It sounded insane. So instead, I kept smiling. I laughed when I was supposed to. I acted like nothing was wrong, but something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it yet. One night, I decided to bring it up, casually, lightly, like it was nothing. We were lying in bed, my head resting on his chest, the way we always did. The room was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of the city lights outside our window. "Do you think Sophia flirts with you?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Max froze for a fraction of a second. It was so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. Then he let out a laugh, running his fingers through my hair. "What? No, that's ridiculous." I let out a small, breathy laugh, pretending I was just joking. "I don't know. I just noticed she laughs a lot when you're around, and she touches you a lot." He shrugged. "That's just how she is. She's always been like that." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I did. Or at least, I tried. But the doubts wouldn't go away. They crept in when I least expected them. When Max would be texting late at night and angle his phone away. When Sophia would mention something about his life that I hadn't even heard yet. When I caught them exchanging glances across a room and something inside me twisted so hard it hurt. I started second-guessing myself. Was I crazy? Was I jealous for no reason? I told myself I was being insecure, that I needed to trust him. After all, he loved me. Right? And Sophia, she would never betray me. Right? I ignored the signs, because the alternative was unthinkable. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, frozen, staring at the two people who had just shattered my entire world. My sister, still clutching the bedsheet around her like it could somehow shield her from the truth of what she had done. Max, standing there, half-dressed, running a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to care but didn't quite know how. The betrayal burned through me like acid, eating away at everything I had once believed in. You've been sleeping with my boyfriend for a year? My voice didn't sound like my own. It was raw, broken, strangled by the lump in my throat. Sophia opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear any excuses, any justifications. Nothing could ever make this okay. I needed to get out. I turned on my heel, storming down the hallway to the room I had been staying in. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to shove my clothes into my suitcase. Every breath felt like knives in my chest. Wait! Max's voice came from behind me, footsteps quickly following. Just stop for a second. Let's talk about this. I spun around so fast he almost crashed into me. Talk? You want to talk? Now? After you spent a year screwing my sister behind my back? He flinched at the venom in my voice. It wasn't like that. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that didn't belong to me. Oh? So what was it like, Max? Please enlighten me. Sophia appeared in the doorway, still looking guilty, still looking like she thought she was sorry. I couldn't stand to look at either of them. Without another word, I zipped up my suitcase, grabbed my bag, and pushed past them. Wait, please! Sophia grabbed my wrist, her grip desperate. I ripped my arm away like her touch burned me. Don't touch me. My voice was so cold, so full of disgust, I barely recognized it. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I turned to face her one last time, my whole body shaking with fury. You didn't just hurt me, Sophia. You destroyed me. And the worst part? You don't even look sorry for it. You're just sorry you got caught. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't care what she had to say anymore. I stormed out of the house, dragging my suitcase behind me, barely able to breathe. I drove straight to my parents' house, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My vision blurred with unshed tears, but I forced myself to keep going. I couldn't stay in that house a second longer. I needed to get away, to be somewhere safe. When I pulled into the driveway, I barely put the car in park before stumbling out. My mother was in the kitchen when I burst through the door, my father sitting in his usual chair, reading the newspaper. They both turned to me with wide eyes, immediately sensing something was wrong. Sweetheart? My mom's voice was filled with concern. What happened? I dropped my suitcase to the floor. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. My throat tightened. I could barely get the words out. Max and Sophia, they've been together for a year. Silence. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears. My father set down his paper, his face turning red with fury. What? His voice was low, dangerous. I wiped at my face, trying to keep myself together, but it was useless. I caught them, in the cabin, together. My voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly I was crying. Not just tears, but full-body, gut-wrenching sobs. My mom rushed forward, pulling me into her arms. Oh, sweetheart, I had no idea. We had no idea. My dad stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'm going to kill him. I shook my head against my mother's shoulder. No, I don't want revenge. I don't want anything. I can't be here. She pulled back, looking into my face. Then stay here, please. You don't have to go anywhere. But I couldn't. Even here, everything reminded me of Sophia. Our childhood photos on the wall, the places we used to sit together, the memories of us laughing, whispering secrets late at night. No, I needed to be somewhere else, somewhere that didn't hold any part of them. So I made my decision. "I'm going to Grandma's," I whispered. My mother blinked in surprise. "Grandma's?" I nodded, wiping at my face. I need to be with someone who won't remind me of them." She hesitated, but nodded. "Okay, if that's what you need." The drive to my grandmother's house was long, but I barely noticed. My mind replayed everything over and over, torturing me with images I never wanted to see again. By the time I arrived, it was late. But the second she opened the door and saw me, her eyes filled with understanding. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a tight hug. And that was when I finally broke. I sobbed into her shoulder, my whole body shaking. I don't know what to do," I whispered. She held me tighter. "You don't have to know what to do right now, honey. You just have to breathe." She led me inside, made me tea, wrapped me in one of her knitted blankets, and let me talk. Let me pour everything out until my throat was sore and my heart felt numb. I told her everything, from the first time I met Max to the way I started noticing things, to the moment I walked in on them and my world shattered. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She just held my hand and said, "You are stronger than this pain. I promise you, one day you will look back at this and realize that losing them was the best thing that could have happened to you." I wanted to believe her, but right now, all I could feel was the gaping hole in my chest where my heart used to be. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear from them. Not Max, not Sophia, not even my parents, who I knew were worried. I needed silence. I needed distance. Because if I listened to them now, if I let them into my head, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to pull myself out again. The past week had been a blur of sadness, silence, and endless cups of tea. My grandmother tried her best to comfort me, and I loved her for it, but there was no easy fix for a betrayal like this. Some wounds just needed time, and right now, all I could do was endure the pain. I spent my days in a daze, curled up on the couch with a book I never really read, staring out the window as if the wind or the passing cars could somehow carry my thoughts away. My phone remained off. The idea of hearing their voices, my sister's, my parents', his, made me sick. "Mabel, you can't stay inside forever," Grandma finally said one morning, sitting across from me at the breakfast table. "You're young. You need fresh air. Go for a walk." I shook my head. "I don't feel like it." "You didn't feel like eating yesterday, and I had to practically force soup down your throat," she reminded me with a raised brow. "And you don't feel like talking or laughing or doing anything at all. Enough. Today, you go outside." I sighed, pressing my fingers against my temples. "Grandma?" "No arguments," she said firmly, crossing her arms. 15 minutes. Just walk down to the square and back. Breathe in the world, child. It won't hurt you." I knew better than to argue when she had that look in her eyes. So with a reluctant groan, I got up, threw on a jacket, and stepped outside for the first time in what felt like forever. The cool breeze felt almost foreign against my skin as I walked through the sleepy streets of town. It was different here than in the city. Quieter. The roads were lined with small shops, flower stands, and elderly neighbors sitting on benches, gossiping about things I didn't have the energy to care about. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts still heavy, but at least I was moving. And that was when I saw him. A young man stood at the corner of a narrow street, glancing around with a slightly lost expression. His unusual appearance caught my attention first. Dark curls, strikingly light eyes, and sharp features that looked like they belonged in a painting rather than real life. He was well dressed, but his body language gave away his uncertainty. Then he spoke. "Excusez-moi, mademoiselle." His voice was smooth, his accent unmistakably French. I blinked, startled to hear my second language in such an unexpected place. It took me a second to register that he was looking directly at me. "Oui?" I responded automatically. His face lit up with relief. "Dieu merci. You speak French." I tilted my head, intrigued despite myself. Yes. Do you need help? Actually, yes. He let out a small laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been walking in circles for 20 minutes, trying to find a bakery. I think I took the wrong turn. I couldn't help but smile a little. Which bakery? He reached into his pocket, pulled out a slightly crumpled note, and read from it. Boulangerie de Margot. I almost laughed. You're very close. It's just down that street, 2 blocks from here. I pointed in the direction he needed to go. His shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you. I thought I was losing my mind. Not yet, I teased, feeling a strange lightness for the first time in days. He smiled back, and there was something in his expression, something open, unguarded, that made me curious. Are you visiting? I asked, realizing I wanted to keep the conversation going. Not exactly. I'm here for a little while trying to figure some things out, he admitted. And hopefully, to get a job. The bakery, actually. I heard they were hiring. I raised an eyebrow. So you got lost looking for a job interview? He sighed dramatically. Yes, a very promising start, I know. I found myself chuckling. When was the last time I had laughed? Well, I said, crossing my arms. Lucky for you, I know the owner. Margot is very kind. If you explain why you were late, I'm sure she'll understand. You know the owner? His eyes widened slightly. That's a good sign, right? Depends, I said playfully. Are you a good baker? A mischievous grin spread across his face. That depends. Do you like croissants? I'd be a fool not to. Then if I get the job, I'll make you the best croissant you've ever had. There was something so effortless about talking to him, something that made me forget, even just for a moment, about all the pain I had been drowning in. Deal, I said, surprising myself. His grin widened. Then I have extra motivation to impress Margot. I glanced at my watch and realized I had been standing here, talking to this stranger, for nearly 20 minutes. Grandma had only asked me to go outside for 15, and yet I wasn't in a hurry to go back. I should probably let you go before you're really late, I said. Right. He nodded, but hesitated for a second. Before I do, what's your name? I hesitated, but something about him made me trust him, I told him. His eyes softened as he repeated it, as if savoring the way it sounded. Beautiful name. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. You don't even know if I'm telling the truth. I'm trusting you, he said with a smirk. It's only fair, since you saved me from wandering the streets all day. I'm Gabriel, by the way. Gabriel. It suited him. Nice to meet you, Gabriel, I said. And thank you again, he added. I hope I'll see you around? I bit my lip, hesitating. But then, for the first time in a long time, I decided to say yes to something. Maybe, I said, turning to walk away. As I headed home, I realized I felt lighter, like the heavy weight of the past week had loosened, even just a little. And maybe, just maybe, meeting Gabriel had been exactly what I needed. The sleepless nights were the worst. Lying in bed at my grandmother's house, staring at the ceiling, my mind played an endless loop of everything I didn't want to think about. No matter how much I tried to push it away, the thoughts crept back in, like whispers in the dark. What am I supposed to do now? That question had been tormenting me for days. It gnawed at me, refusing to let me rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Max and Sophia. The way they looked at me when I caught them, the guilt smeared across their faces like they had only just realized what they had done. A whole year, a year of lies, a year of looking me in the eye, sharing family dinners, pretending like nothing was wrong. My sister, my own sister. I clenched my fists under the blankets, a familiar wave of bitterness washing over me. How was I ever supposed to forgive her? Could I even try? I wanted to say no. I needed to say no. Forgiving her would mean excusing what she did, acting like it was just a mistake. But it wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal, a deliberate, selfish choice, over and over again. And yet, she was still my sister. No matter how much I hated what she had done, we were bound by blood, by childhood memories, by years of being each other's person. Could I really go the rest of my life without speaking to her? Did she even deserve my forgiveness? I didn't know. I hated that I didn't know. During the day, I did my best to distract myself. I helped my grandmother around the house, went on walks, pretended I was fine. But the moment I had a second to myself, the doubts returned. And lately, those doubts weren't just about my past. They were about my future. Or rather, about him. Gabriel. It was ridiculous how much space he had taken up in my mind after just one conversation. It wasn't even that I liked him, at least not in a way that I was ready to admit. But something about him unsettled me. Not in a bad way. In a way that made me feel something. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Intrigue, curiosity, a small, hesitant flicker of excitement. And that terrified me. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that trusting people was dangerous. That letting someone in meant giving them the power to hurt you. I wasn't sure I could do that again. I wasn't sure I wanted to. But at the same time, what was the alternative? To close myself off forever? To spend my life afraid, never letting anyone get close? No, that wasn't living. I didn't want to be someone who let pain define them. I didn't want to let their betrayal ruin me. Max and Sophia had taken enough from me already. I wouldn't let them take my ability to feel again, too. I sighed, sitting up in bed, hugging my knees to my chest. The room was quiet, the air cool against my skin. Somewhere outside, a dog barked in the distance. I needed to make a decision. I couldn't keep running from this, from everything. I needed to figure out who I was going to be after all of this. Because the truth was, I had spent my entire life trying to be good. Trying to be the daughter my parents were proud of. The sister who was always there. The girlfriend who loved without hesitation. And look where that had gotten me. I had spent so much time caring for everyone else that I never stopped to ask myself, what do I want? What kind of life did I want to build for myself? The betrayal had already happened. The pain was real, and no amount of wishing would change that. But what came next? That was still in my hands. I found myself thinking about Gabriel again. He had been a complete stranger, and yet, for a brief moment, talking to him had made me feel normal. Like I was just a girl helping a lost traveler instead of a shattered person piecing herself back together. The way he had smiled, the way he had joked about making me the best croissant of my life, it was such a simple thing, and yet it had stuck with me. Would I ever see him again? Should I even want to? The thought of letting someone new into my life scared me. Because what if it happened again? What if I trusted someone and they hurt me just like Max did? What if this was all I would ever be? Someone who people loved until they found something better. I hated that thought. I hated how much power it still had over me. And I realized something in that moment. I was tired of being afraid. I had spent an entire week drowning in my own sadness, letting their betrayal control my every thought. I had given them enough of my time, enough of my emotions. It was time to start taking my life back. That didn't mean I had to forgive them. That didn't mean I had to be ready to trust again overnight. But it meant that I had to start trying, to live for myself, to stop letting other people's actions dictate my happiness. Maybe I wasn't ready to move on yet. Maybe I still had a long way to go before I could open my heart to anything new. But for the first time, I wanted to try. And that was something. The days passed quietly. There was a peace in my grandmother's home that I hadn't realized I needed. The world outside seemed distant, as if the betrayal, the heartbreak, and all the things I had left behind belonged to another lifetime. I spent my mornings helping Grandma in the kitchen, afternoons curled up with a book or finishing my coursework, and evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a slow life, a simple one, but right now it was exactly what I needed. Going back home? That wasn't even a question. The thought of stepping into the same house where she lived, where I had once felt safe, made my stomach turn. So I stayed. I officially switched to online classes, explaining to my professors that I needed some time away. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. Grandma, of course, was thrilled to have me. "Stay as long as you need, Mabel," she would say, ruffling my hair like she used to when I was a child. "There is always a place for you here." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. I was choosing this. I was building something new for myself. And then, one quiet afternoon, everything shifted again. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I was sitting in the small living room, my laptop open on the table, a cup of tea slowly cooling beside me. Before I could react, Grandma had already moved to the door, humming to herself as she wiped her hands on her apron. The sound of the door creaking open. A brief pause. Then, "Ma chérie," she called out, her voice laced with curiosity and amusement. "There is a very handsome young man at the door asking for you." I frowned, pushing my chair back. "What?" "You heard me," she laughed. "Come, come." I sighed, closing my laptop as I stood up. Who could possibly be looking for me here? I hadn't given anyone my address. Stepping into the doorway, my breath caught for just a second. Gabriel. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, wearing a dark sweater and jeans, his usual confident smirk in place. But there was something else in his eyes, something lighter, almost teasing. "Bonjour," he said, raising an eyebrow. "I had no way to contact you, so I had to track you down like some old-fashioned romantic hero. Are you impressed?" I blinked, still trying to process the fact that he was here. "Wait, how did you even find me?" His smirk grew. "You mentioned once that you lived near the bakery. It wasn't hard to ask around." I stared at him for a moment before letting out a small, incredulous laugh. "You asked around? That sounds like something a stalker would do." He placed a hand on his chest in mock offense. "A stalker? Non, I am simply a man on a mission." I shook my head, still half in disbelief. "And what mission would that be?" He grinned. "I came to ask if you'd like to go for a walk." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, I did. But it had been so long since I had let myself just go out, enjoy something without overthinking. Gabriel must have sensed my hesitation because he lifted his hands in surrender. "No pressure, mademoiselle. Just a friendly walk. You do go outside sometimes, don't you?" I crossed my arms. "Sometimes." "Good," he said. "Then today can be one of those times." I glanced at my grandmother, who was standing beside me, watching our exchange with barely contained amusement. "Well," she said, nudging me gently, "are you going to let this charming young man wait all day?" I sighed, but a small smile tugged at my lips. "Fine," I said, grabbing my coat. "Let's go." The afternoon air was crisp as we walked through the quiet streets. At first, I wasn't sure what to say. It had been a long time since I had gone anywhere with someone new, without the weight of my past dragging me down. But Gabriel made it easy. He talked about everything and nothing, his experiences traveling, his first impressions of this small town, how he still got confused by some of the local customs. "You know," he said at one point, hands in his pockets, "I was very tempted to give up on finding the bakery after getting lost for so long. But then you showed up, and I thought, maybe this town isn't so bad after all." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying I saved your entire experience here?" He grinned. "Absolutely. You should feel honored." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile. We walked for what felt like hours, stopping by a small cafe, watching street musicians perform in the square. It was the first time in weeks, maybe even months, that I felt normal, like a weight had lifted, even if just for a little while. As the sun began to set, we finally made our way back toward my grandmother's house. "Here," Gabriel said, pulling out his phone. "Before you disappear again. Your number, mademoiselle." I hesitated for only a second before taking his phone and typing it in. When I handed it back, he glanced at the screen, then smirked. "And here, I thought you might give me a fake one." I laughed. "You did track me down, after all. I figured I owed you some honesty." "Then I'll take that as a win," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. I watched him for a moment, realizing how strange it was, how nice it was, to have someone new in my life. Someone who didn't remind me of pain. Someone who wasn't tangled up in the mess I had left behind. "Thank you," I said suddenly. He tilted his head. "For what?" "For this," I admitted. "For today." A soft smile touched his lips. "Anytime." From that day on, things began to change. We started texting, small things at first, random jokes, interesting things we saw throughout the day, casual conversations that somehow never felt forced. And then we started meeting up, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks, sometimes just to sit on a bench and talk about nothing in particular. I hadn't expected it, but Gabriel became my friend. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. The weeks passed in a blur of quiet mornings, peaceful afternoons, and long walks with Gabriel. It was strange how natural our friendship had become. Every day, we found new reasons to meet, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the old bookstore near the square, sometimes just walking aimlessly through the streets, talking about everything and nothing. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in so long. Not the polite, forced kind of laughter I had faked for my family, but the real kind, the one that made my chest feel lighter, the kind that reminded me what it was like to enjoy someone's company without fear. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. That evening had started like any other. Gabriel and I had gone for a walk, and as always, conversation flowed easily between us. He told me about his first few days at the bakery, how he had already burned one batch of croissants and nearly started a small fire. "I swear, the oven hates me," he groaned, kicking a small rock on the pavement. "I don't understand. I followed the recipe exactly." I laughed, shaking my head. "Are you sure? Because burning croissants is basically a crime in France." He gasped, pressing a hand dramatically to his chest. "Mademoiselle, you wound me. I am deeply ashamed." I smirked. "You should be." We kept walking, the sky slowly darkening, the streetlights flickering to life around us. It was cold, but in a refreshing way, the kind of evening that made you want to wrap yourself in a warm coat and keep talking forever. Eventually, we reached my grandmother's house. "See you tomorrow?" Gabriel asked, tilting his head slightly. I nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow." He smiled. "Bonne nuit." "Good night, Gabriel." I stepped inside, still feeling the warmth of our conversation, and then everything shattered. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Sophia. I froze in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. She looked so normal, her hair slightly messy, a cup of tea in front of her, fingers fidgeting against the ceramic. But she wasn't supposed to be here. Not here. Not in the one place where I finally felt safe. "What the hell are you doing here?" My voice came out sharp, furious. She flinched, but quickly tried to recover, her hands tightening around the cup. "I needed to talk to you." "I have nothing to say to you," I spat. My whole body was shaking, rage boiling beneath my skin. "Please," she whispered. "Just listen." I took a step back, shaking my head. No, you don't get to show up here and ask me to listen to you like nothing happened." Grandma must have let her in. Maybe she thought she was helping. Maybe she thought I needed this. But I didn't. I had spent weeks trying to forget her, trying to erase the image of her and Max, trying to piece myself back together after she had torn me apart. And now she was just here? Like she had the right? I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. Not again. "You have 5 seconds to leave," I said, voice trembling with barely contained fury. Sophia's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry." I let out a hollow laugh. "Too late. I never meant to." "Stop!" My voice cracked, the pain breaking through my anger. "Just stop. I don't want to hear it. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. I don't want anything from you." Tears finally spilled down my cheeks, hot and angry. I turned on my heel and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just had to get out. I stumbled out into the cold night air, barely able to breathe. My chest was tight, my vision blurred with tears. And then, "Hey!" I looked up just in time to see Gabriel standing a few feet away, holding something in his hands. His expression shifted from confusion to immediate concern the moment he saw my face. Mon Dieu, what happened? He was in front of me in an instant. "Are you okay?" I shook my head violently, wrapping my arms around myself as if I could hold all the broken pieces inside. I don't..." My voice broke. Gabriel hesitated for only a second before he gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Breathe, he said softly. Whatever it is, you don't have to say it right now. Just breathe. I took a shaky inhale, trying to steady myself. For a moment, we just stood there. Me, breaking apart, and him, standing beside me like an anchor in the storm. Then, finally, I found my voice. My sister, I whispered. She's here. His brows furrowed slightly. The one who... I nodded, fresh tears spilling over. Gabriel exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Merde, he muttered under his breath. I'm so sorry. I wiped at my face furiously. I don't understand why she came. I don't want to hear her excuses. I don't care what she has to say, My voice broke again, and I let out a shaky laugh, bitter and broken. I thought I was doing better. I thought I was moving on. But seeing her, it just brought everything back. Gabriel was silent for a moment. Then, very softly, he said, Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean the pain just disappears. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. It just means you keep going anyway, he continued, even when it still hurts. Something in his voice, something knowing, something deeper than simple sympathy, made my breath catch. He understood. I didn't know how or why, but he understood. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. I don't know if I can keep going. You can, he said simply, and you will. His words settled deep in my chest, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I exhaled, wiping my face with the sleeve of my sweater. You came all the way here, I said, my voice still thick with emotion. Why? Gabriel held up the small device in his hand. Your power bank. You left it at the cafe. I blinked, then let out a small, choked laugh. Of course I did. He smiled, handing it to me. I wasn't expecting this turn of events, though. Me neither, I admitted. For a moment, we just stood there, the cold night air wrapping around us. Then, hesitantly, Gabriel reached out, brushing a stray tear from my cheek. His touch was warm, careful, and in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something more. The next few days passed in a strange, quiet blur. I hadn't seen or heard from Sophia since that awful night, and I was grateful for it. My grandmother didn't bring her up either, sensing that I needed space. But something else had changed too. Or rather, someone. Gabriel. Ever since that night, something between us had shifted. It wasn't just casual friendship anymore, wasn't just easy conversations and playful teasing. It was more. The way he looked at me lingered a little longer. The way he spoke felt softer, more careful. And the way I felt around him, it scared me. Because I liked it. I liked him. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel terrifying. It felt right. A week after Sophia's visit, Gabriel and I went for another one of our walks. This time, he took me outside of town, past the quiet streets and the familiar cafe, down a small dirt road that led to an open field. The sky stretched endlessly above us, soft and golden from the setting sun. The air smelled fresh, like grass and wildflowers, and in the distance, a small river sparkled beneath the fading light. I sighed, letting my eyes close for just a second, letting myself breathe it all in. It's beautiful. Gabriel hummed in agreement. It is. I glanced at him and caught him staring, not at the view, but at me. A warmth spread through my chest. You brought me here for the view, right? Not just to stare at me like a weirdo? He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, maybe a little of both. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. We sat down on the soft grass, and for a long time, we just sat in silence, watching the sky change colors. Then, finally, Gabriel spoke. You're different, he said, his voice thoughtful. I turned to him, raising an eyebrow. Different how? He hesitated, then met my gaze. When we first met, you were closed off, he admitted, like you were trying to disappear. But now, I swallowed, waiting for him to finish. Now, I see you, he said softly. Not just the girl who was hurting, not just the girl who was running, but you. My heart stuttered in my chest. "You make it sound like I've changed," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head. "Haven't you?" I thought about it. About the girl who had walked into that vacation house and had her entire world fall apart. The girl who had run, who had hidden, who had let grief consume her. And the girl sitting here now. She wasn't the same. Maybe she was still healing. Maybe she still had scars that would take time to fade. But she was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. And that was enough. I exhaled, turning to face him fully. "Maybe I have." A slow smile spread across his lips. "I like this version of you." I let out a soft laugh. "That's good, because I think I do too." Gabriel's eyes flickered to my lips for just a second, so quick I almost missed it. But I felt it, the shift in the air, the quiet tension between us. And for the first time, I didn't want to run from it. I leaned in first, closing the small space between us. Gabriel met me halfway. The moment our lips touched, it was gentle, soft, a quiet confession of something that had been growing between us for weeks. His hand found mine in the grass, fingers lacing together like they had always belonged there. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't thinking about Max, or Sophia, or the pain. I was only thinking about now. And for the first time, now felt like enough. We walked back hand in hand, neither of us in a hurry, neither of us needing to say much. When we reached my grandmother's house, Gabriel squeezed my hand gently. "So, does this mean you like me?" I smirked.